The Experiential Edge, the show about learning by doing in higher education, with your host, Trevor Finch.
Welcome to The Experiential Edge, the podcast for post-secondary instructors looking for ideas, answers, roadmaps to building better learning environments. I'm your host, Trevor Finch. Today's topic is AI. Now, I think we're both, or everyone is either super excited about AI or just overwhelmed with it, right? We've heard too much, but that's the reality. AI has entered higher ed faster than most institutions were prepared for. And in experiential learning, at any kind, the tension feels a little bit sharper, right? Because experiential learning is built on doing, struggling, deciding, reflecting. So the question becomes, when does AI actually enhance that process and when does it replace it? So this is a big question, and it's one that we're very confused about what the answers, the directions, and I think what we have to do is we have to bring it back to a starting point, right? Which is, are we as instructors learning the AI tools as well or even better than our students before we dictate to them how they're going to use it? So we're going to talk about how when faculty experiment with AI as a tool, maybe working with case study variations, stress testing some simulation strategies, refining presentations, they can see where it strengthens learning, where it shortcuts it. So by us understanding the tool better, we can expand the sandbox for the students. We can make it a little bit better, but they still have to go through it. Where our responsibility comes into is designing that sandbox for them. And so the question that we want to tackle a little bit today is, how do we take advantage of the tools at hand while also ensuring that real learning takes place? And you know what? That's where AI and experiential learning comes in and why today's conversation matters. So our guest today is Matthew Schonewille, right?
Seanwell, perfect, yep.
There we go. You know what? I'm terrible with pronunciation. Assistant professor of business at Redeemer University and an absolute expert on AI, both in terms of in general, but also in education. And you are actually doing a really cool PhD on the subject, right? So maybe just before we jump in to the topic, just briefly describe your focus.
Yeah, so my approach, it's funny, interesting. It comes to about being like a parent, meaning when I got into using AI and understanding, it was more of like, how do I use this? What do I use? How will my students use this? How will kids use it? And my brain was thinking, I just want to be prepared and aware of how we think through the use of AI, because it's not a technology that is like Microsoft Word or PowerPoint. It's actually pervasive. It's everywhere, and not everywhere in a bad way, but it's very accessible and very autonomous. And that is exciting and scary, meaning it's not like, oh, log into the computer and use it. It's like, no, we have access in a different way, and it's a different way we have to approach it. Almost like teaching kids and people to think of, how do we cross the street? We look left and right. And that's sort of an interesting concept of thinking of how we approach the use of AI in many different forms and thinking through it.
You know, it's interesting you say it that way, because it makes me think about, once we get to higher ed, the basic foundations are laid, right? And all the things that we're teaching, even if
You hope they're laid.
Well, but we're teaching accounting, but we've made sure that they have a basic literacy in math. We teach business writing, but we have to make sure they have a basic benchmark of skill set within their English or French or whatever language you're using. But when we're teaching now with AI as a tool, there is some fundamentals that are missing. And it's not just missing from the students themselves in terms of a skill set. It's also missing from us as instructors and professors because we're not familiar. So like you said about crossing the street, looking both ways, we're teaching the ABCs of AI while we're trying to teach the higher level of everything else. It's almost incongruent. And would you agree that that's one of the challenges that we're facing of integrating AI in learning?
I would say it's a fair statement. The fact of AI itself is this boogeyman or exciting tool, however way you want to look at it. And it's really important that anybody, like instructors, we have to get back to the core of what are we trying to do? What are we trying to assess? Microsoft Word, well, it's changing now, but doesn't write for you, whereas AI aspects can write for you. Well, if you're asking students to use a tool, what's the purpose of that? What's the meaning behind using that tool? Microsoft Word, for example, is a tool to document our writing or our essay or to present or showcase whatever we're thinking, whereas artificial intelligence, whatever tool you're using, could simulate and create and do all of that. So it's not as much, it is teaching the ABCs of the literal tangible use of the tools, but I would argue it's much more about what's the why behind what we are doing. I always tell my students, we're doing this assessment for this reason. We are here to learn these specific things. If you don't learn those, you've missed the whole point of this whole activity. And the beauty of the technology world we live in, it's changing a bit in a way where it's like, well, do we have to assess this way, or do we have to test it this way, or do we have to worry about that process intensively the same way? And it's really just changing the way we think about education as a whole. And it should, because it should validate what we're doing or challenge us to change and adapt what we're doing if it's not refined to what society wants us to do in the future.
Absolutely. It is interesting when you think about the approach to AI and in the classroom. And you mentioned like boogeyman, like there is that fear,
Mhm.
right? That fear. And, we're so overwhelmed with either the fear or the shininess of it.
Mhm.
And we know which way we lean, right? The two
Mhm.
of us are much more geeks about AI and how to use it. But when you think about it, we get so focused on how shiny or cool it is or how big and scary it is, we forget that in the end, it's just a tool to help us, right? And the students. The reason that we have this class, that either as a student participating or us leading, is that there's learning objectives and there are
Mhm.
competencies that we are trying to develop. So can that be or that should be, in my opinion, that should be where we always need to lean back. Sometimes we forget, we're in such of the weeds that you got to step back and say, this is actually supporting. How can we use this to support this learning objective, this learning
Mhm.
objective? And
Mhm.
I think maybe some of the clarity or some of the confusion might just dissipate thinking it that way. What do you think?
Well, I agree. It's important with anything. It's where does this thing positioned in your mind, right? Like you think of a simulation or a process or a case study. Like, what is the point of that tool? Where does it fit in your workflow or your process? And AI doesn't fit in anything yet until educators know what it does and what they can do with it and how students can use it and how it can help or hurt their process. And I think that the sort of the GPS map. Like if you trust a GPS without knowing the map, you're literally trusting a tool to guide you through the city. But if you already know the map and the GPS is supportive of what you're doing, it changes. You're like, no, wait, I know how this tool fits in my workflow or my mentality of what I'm doing. And I think that because AI forces you to think a bit differently of how do I have to change or adapt and pivot potentially, and how I think through how I teach and what my students are doing and what they could do, the accessibility of circumventing a process if they choose to do that, or the ability of learning in a different way. It's challenging how people think and educators think. And I understand, like myself as an educator, it's like, oh, I got to think through this. And I've been doing this for like 3.5 years as of right now. And I've got colleagues that are like, okay, fine, I got to start to think through how do I change my rote process? How do I change this? And that I think change management is one of the biggest problems here is educators are being forced to change. Wait, how do I think about this? Like it's not
Yeah.
a stable, static thing I know.
But it's a challenge, right?
Oh, major challenge.
In any way, in any form that requires us to have change as an instructor, because we are here, we are hired, and we are presenting ourselves, whether we feel it or not, as the experts on the subject that we're teaching, and that is our
Mhm.
highest priority. And it becomes very difficult to say, hey, I'm teaching this subject matter. I'm building this. We have all kinds of restrictions when it comes to course outlines, to what are adult learning techniques, the different challenges that we have within every institution in terms of how things are approved. So we have to navigate that. And then we have to add something new in. And trust me, as a guy who talks to customers all day about implementing a new software, a new classroom tool, it's one of the number one barriers is I just don't have time for this. But they can't just back out and say nothing, can they?
Mhm.
This is inevitable, is it not?
Well, AI is here. It's not going anywhere. And also it's been around since the 50s, meaning just the way we're utilizing it now in the public facing sector is the new piece, right? So it's in our phones, in our computers, in our cars, but now we can access it in a way that we otherwise didn't understand before. And it's inevitable. Like we have to think of
Yeah.
what change looks like. But it doesn't mean it's a good or a bad thing. It's just, well, how does this interact in our classroom and how do we think through that? So it is forcing change to say, wait, let's evaluate exactly what I'm doing here, which we should be doing anyways. We should be always critiquing and checking what we're doing in our classrooms. And does this work? And does this make sense? And I think AI is sort of challenging people to, well, I actually have to think a bit differently. Or the ones that are doing that naturally, oh, this is good. I can think outside the box. And it's that boogeyman until we know what it can do and how we can use it and how students can use it. And then we
Yeah.
know, good or bad, how it works. Like cheating is not new, right? Trevor? Like cheating is nothing new.
No.
It's just the concept of doing something and getting away with it is nothing new. It's just in my argument with AI, it's just more autonomous and accessible if we choose to have a nefarious line in some way. And nefarious is the right and wrong word, but it's extremely accessible and
Yes.
yeah, autonomous and accessible as of yet. There's so much autonomy.
Yeah, and we know the landscape is changing, and that's going to be a talk
Yeah.
for I'm sure for another day.
Another
But
day.
when you said twice, right? And I know we don't want to always use this as a characterization, but good and the bad, right? So we'll just
Mhm.
talk about some positive negatives,
Sure.
and everything has that. So if we just kind of focus on AI as a tool that we as instructors can use, right? So never mind what the students are doing. We'll just set that for we've heard that ad nauseum. But when it comes to us in a classroom using it as a tool, what are you seeing or what do you identify? Let's
Mhm.
start with the major pitfalls. Like, what are some of the things, the biggest mistakes that you think you're seeing out there from instructors who are trying to use it, or even just people in general, without realizing that they're making some critical, just, I don't want to say mistakes, but they're just not approaching it, or they're doing some fundamentals that maybe could be tweaked and they would have a better experience.
So knowing what you're looking at, and what I mean by that is, in order to, in my argument, in the use of AI, I don't generate or I organize, right? Meaning, a lot of times people generate, they talk about generating content and so on. Well, a lot of times I'm using AI to be a piece of my workflow to organize my content that exists already, and it's merely a piece of that process where the origination is from me. It originates from me, and it is a part of my tool, my workflow. One of the pitfalls I would argue for people using it is just not knowing what they're looking for. So just like with students, it's if you don't know what you're critiquing and you don't know what you're looking at, meaning the content, like if you have never built a lesson plan before or a lecture on a topic that you're not an expert in, you have to make sure, just like your research, that you critique it and evaluate it and learning what that looks like in this world, because it's so amazing. The words, the writing, it sounds so good. And it's, well, we should always have that critical eye. And how do we view this and not take it for granted? Then there's the whole idea of authorship and ownership, which is a whole other thinking through logical discussion that things will have to change until the governing bodies approach this, because the idea of ownership and authorship changes with the use of AI depending on what you do and how you use it. And I think just having a critical eye is an important thing, of just not knowing what they're looking at or even believing in what they could create, because we are the limiting factor in the use of AI, meaning if you can't do it, it's because of you. It's not the AI. It's understanding the process, meaning whether we're communicating or, like, I did a vibe coding workshop last night, and with students who had these prototypes, they wanted to prototype and build some apps. And I said, well, for the concept here, we can build an app. I said, but if you don't know, think of a puzzle. Years ago, it would be really hard to build all the pieces of the puzzle, and you would have people that you hire to build pieces of that puzzle to make the puzzle. Well, AI enables a lot of those pieces to be created, but there's still aspects of those pieces that you have to know to be able to make that work. And the same thing for professors using it. Well, AI could fill the pieces, the blanks of that course learning outcome, or those learning outcomes, or that the course plan, but you still have to know how to take that content and put it in and evaluate and critique it and make sure it's aligned and the words matter. And I think it's just having an understanding of, it can look so good and ideate and change, and it just being very aware of what you're looking at to critique it so you know what to do.
And enhancing what you already have, right? Because we are
Yeah,
supposed to be
yeah.
our own experts, right? And we should have material. So it does have that ability to do that.
To repurpose too. Like there's, oh my
Yes.
goodness, I have so many ways to, like, I'm taking my slide decks that were beautifully old, but my content, and saying, hey, let's repurpose this in a new visual form. The content's still the same. I
Yeah.
have the ability to design it, but I'm like, let's just utilize this tool and utilize my time well, and then repurpose it and then critique it and make sure it's correct. And now I've 10x'd my output so I can spend more time with my students or deviate, whatever. Like, it's amazing what you can do if you understand the possibility.
Yes. One of the things that I remember you teaching us to do, because you came and did some work with us,
Yeah.
was, I guess, a couple things. Number one is don't be afraid to challenge AI, right?
No, never be afraid.
Doesn't look right,
It's a
right?
tool. It's a subordinate. It's a tool that you were directing.
And it's coded like ChatGPT is the one I use the most.
Yeah.
And it is like literally coded to just sugarcoat everything and kiss your boots and love
Stick
you
a
up.
fancy.
Exactly. So you kind of gotta, you think of it like okay, yeah, you're just telling me what I want to hear. Is this true? Yes or no? So challenging is a good one. And the other one that I remember you talking about was exactly what you said. Is that yes, it create material, but sometimes we don't know what we want, or we
Yes.
don't know how to express it. So
Mhm.
don't be afraid to either ask the search engine or the AI
tool,
tool
search engine.
itself, right? So hey, what's the best way to structure a prompt,
Yep.
right? Or go into another tool and say, hey, I want to create a prompt in blah blah blah, and I want to do this. Like, don't be afraid to ask the tool how to get the best out of it. That's kind of the crazy thing about AI, I think, is that it can tell you how to work it better.
And that's the thing that people don't get. I find if you have a creative mind and a willingness to ask questions, you'll do very well with AI. But if you don't have a open mindset, it's very hard. With a closed mindset, you're not going to do well. With an open
Yeah.
mindset, it's going to change just like anything. Like, oh, what about this? The possibility of that. Can you do this? And can I do that? And what about this? And knowing that you're not asking it for absolute truth. You're not giving it agency. You're saying, no, I have the expert eye to say, hey, but what about this? And critique what it says. Like, great example. Years ago, when I was building a website in the age of AI, I was like, okay, ChatGPT, I want to figure out, I don't know if I should start charging for this website or just leave it free and open source. And like, I have an expertise in a master's in entrepreneurship. Like, I've done many businesses. Like, I know what I'm doing. Pivoted. I love it. It makes sense. And ChatGPT gave me 7 ideas. 6 of them were useless, but it did one thing that got me out of the rut of what I was thinking. It said, Matt, at the end of the day, you can just pivot if you don't want to do this. I was like, oh, like I know that, but it got me away from my own thinking.
Yes.
And it just, the eyes I have, the expertise, like I know how to critique this, but it just got me thinking like a friend would. I was like, oh, I didn't think of that. Obviously I can pivot, but it just helped me work through that. Whereas if I was a student or didn't have an expertise in that, I didn't know what I was doing, I'd be like, oh, maybe option 3 sounds great. And then I pursue that and it's the wrong way versus having that foundation of knowledge to critique it.
Yes. Yes. And then further on, you could take that, that one idea, well, let's
Yeah.
explore this, and you can use it to explore.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a million ways that we can use these tools. So what I want to do now is just kind of pivot. So we've established that, yes, it's a useful tool. Yes, there are some things we have to be careful of in terms of, some of the dangers, but also there's some very unique advantages and how we can take advantage of it, especially when you talk about organizing, taking material, repurposing it, all the different things. So let's get some specifics. Let's talk about 3 different types of experiential learning, the 3 most common ones, and then talk about how. So I'll ask you, okay, how would you use AI to kind of enhance this? What are some ideas?
Sure.
And we'll just spitball some ideas. We'll move from one to another. So let's start with everyone's old favorite, the case study. Now, I'll just preface this by saying or ask you the question, when you think about case studies and why a lot of people move away from them or are concerned with them, what would you say are the biggest concerns that most instructors have when using case studies?
The access, the answers are there. And I don't know if that's the perspective, I argue that's not right. So when I teach case studies to my students, there are a myriad of different ways you can approach it. And depending on the level you're doing, whether it's undergrad level 1 or grad school, it's just using the tool effectively, right? So AI, you can create a synthetic story about anything. Well, one of the arguments I'm having, and the point too, Trevor, is important, is create a case study for what output. If it's to be published, it's a different approach than to use in my classroom that's not meant to be published, right?
Yeah.
So I'm creating case studies for my students with absolute intent of the class for what I'm doing with the topics that I know will guide them in a way that will challenge their thinking at the level they're at. So I can customize it 100% the way they need it in that moment. But if I didn't know what I was looking for, I couldn't do that. I would have written that before anyways, but now I can expedite the process and refine it. And like, for example, I had a case study for my students that was very believable. Like, you can write whatever you want, but basically I went through this process and I gave them all the answers. But the whole point of the case study was, can you identify the details in the case and teach them how to think through analytical skills of, well, can I go through this process? Do I see the details? Do I understand this? And you can create anything you want. It's just knowing, what do you want to create and what's the purpose of what you're creating. It'd be very different if I was publishing for Ivy, because I have to make sure I respect the guidelines and I go through the process and embody the expected output. Whereas in my classroom, it's no holds barred. It doesn't matter. I'm using it as a teaching tool that's never going to go anywhere, right? And understanding that. And you can then visualize or develop, or you can do so many things with it if you choose to differentiate that instruction with that case study.
Now, a quick and dirty way of doing this would be literally take, okay, here's a case study found online that's been used for the past 10 years. You can find, answers to this everywhere. You take that and say, okay, here, cut and paste it, or put in the PDF, the link, whatever else it is, and just say, okay, here's the case study. Can you create something similar to this in this area? And you can actually guide it into, so it'll retain the format for whatever, and just change it enough that it's something that's new, right? And
Absolutely.
then it can be something. But also, I know with case studies, a cool thing was, I remember using it when I first kind of dipped my toe into it. I actually kind of found some stuff that I had. It was a case study that was existing part of the course. And then I just said, okay, I just literally asked chat, what are some ways that, we could change this or make some questions? So it built some questions for me. It gave me some ideas. Like, what if I change some parameters because I want to talk about this, which isn't in the text, which isn't in here. So I actually asked it to do some things, and it created like this crazy amount of output. And I just use it as a way to reinvent it.
Yep, absolutely.
When you think of case studies, though, like a lot of people get just kind of like that. They're more worried about the students using it to answer the question. So what
Great.
do you say to those instructors who are concerned about that?
If students want to, they will, and they're going to miss the point of learning outcomes. So, and what I mean by that is I've come to a point of limiting my policing, knowing that I'm going to set other guardrails in place to officiate and understand the learning's happening. So with some of my students, depending on the level, I will basically allow the use of AI, but then we go through our live discussion and we evaluate the case. And I said, if you have like this evaluation is essentially your case report, meaning if you wrote the report, you know it. So we should be able to discuss and talk through all of this because you've read it how many times, you've written the report. If AI wrote the report and you're now discussing what AI wrote, okay, that's fine, but you won't pass the final exam because you have to practice the process. That is what we are literally doing. So if you offload it, get her done. Like you'll earn the superficial grade right here, but I'll see you again because you haven't learned the process. So for me, it's always reiterating the expectation of you can't control what you're going to do on your own time. It's completely autonomous with the use of AI. You can argue softwares and tools, which that's a whole other bag of beans that I would say we should not go down of we should not worry about that. But the whole idea is that there's a muscle of integrity that we have to learn and teach our students to understand and go through, and also how to think critically. If they're going to circumvent the system, they're going to do it regardless, and you can't do anything about it. So then how can I at least teach, hey, this is what our intent is, this is what we're doing, and challenge and critique them through that process. And that's a different way to approach it, not giving up. It's actually, let's really embrace this and not say, because I can't control what you do.
And even then, like this is where AI can come in handy is that, okay, I can't control the students. They're going to create output, but okay, so they have to put in their case study evaluation, but use AI, say, okay, give me 3 follow-ups questions that I could ask a student to test whether or not they to do as a verbal question, whether or not they actually understand it. We don't have to go through that cognitive process anymore because it's crazy how much work it takes to think of the question.
Yeah.
More work making the question than actually figuring out what the answer. I know what I want to hear from them, but building that question. So why not let AI do it for you?
And that's the thing. And that's where someone could argue. And I'm on the both sides of that coin, meaning as long as it helps the developmental learning of the student, and that's the end result, right? Meaning I'm always about what's the point of the activity. If I'm doing it this way, that's fine as long as I'm helping the student learn. And the thing is that if we offload that to AI as an instructor, the big thing is AI allows us to access skills we otherwise haven't gained. And as an instructor, we should have that skill already. But if it's maybe the idea of we're accessing critical thinking at a really fast level that we'll never be able to access, but we can now offload some of those questions and be able to then be an expert in our understanding of those questions as we go through this. Yeah. That's the concern with students and educators is like, well, are we not practicing a skill we need to develop, or are we falsely presenting a skill that we have not otherwise gained? And that's an interesting concept. And with like, for example, yesterday I was doing a case, brand new case. I went through it and I said, ChatGPT, here are my notes. Can you give me a running dialogue of my notes just to be clarified? Then I went to Notebook LM as a tool because Notebook LM, you can make infographics. I used it taking my exact content of what I wanted to dialogue and write on the board and guide my students. I said, Notebook LM, can you take this and create an infographic landscape in a chalkboard format so I can then have a visual of what I want to create? And then basically rewrote aspects of those and then guided my students. I'm an artist. I got into University for Fine Art. I didn't pursue it. I know how to do that, but it was just a way to revisualize so I could better support my students in that thinking. Right. And just so many different ways of how do I present this and adapt this and support, and not more work, better ways to communicate. And I would argue as an instructor, you can communicate better a lot of times.
Yeah. And it's about where are we, both with the students, where are we putting our cognitive load?
Yeah.
Right? Is it worth our time to struggle over this piece when AI can help us with this, when really we should be doing this?
Yeah.
Right? It's not that we can't do it all, right? And we have been doing it all. The difference is, where is my time better spent, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that. So, okay, so we talked a little bit about case studies. Let's talk about presentation, student presentation. So if I was an instructor and you know, so many of us, we give our students, okay, you got to come you got to do a presentation, right? Based on whatever you learned. Could be on a case study, could be on anything, whatever else it was. That's one of the most common classroom techniques, and we're using it more and more to combat some of the I like to use the term AI interference that we will see out there sometimes. What would be some ideas that you would give to instructors saying, how could you use AI to make these presentation projects either a little better, a little bit
Yeah.
faster, whatever else it is?
Well, if the output was to assess their ability to make a presentation, then you wouldn't,
Yeah.
right? But if the assessment was more of their ability to present and the visual of the presentation was not what you're assessing them on, then you could literally have them go through, like, for example, with using Praxar as a perfect example. What I do with my students is they go through the term, they do their Praxar, their 8 weeks in their specific simulation, and then they create a summation report that basically it's like, what's the best decisions, worst decisions, and so on. And in years past, they would take that report, create their own presentation from that, and then present it. And now with the advent of AI, I basically say, okay, that report, which used to be worth 10%, is a pass fail. The presentation's worth 10%. And you can use whatever you want tool to present the content. You have to present it with no notes. So that means that you can still memorize, but it should be an embodied example of your 8 weeks of experience. So at the end, they're going to have to memorize aspects of it anyways. And like, oh yeah, we made that decision. So I'm sort of like, well, picking and choosing my battles and saying, well, the report, you can easily create it with AI. I'm going to do a pass fail regardless. And the presentation where you actually communicate is where I'm going to put the emphasis and utilize the tools if you want. And if a student doesn't want to use AI, completely fine. They'll do just as
Exactly.
well because they've practiced the process. They've built the presentation. They know what they're doing. And I still achieve my learning outcome of, do we know the content? Have we learned it? Or whatever they specifically are.
Exactly. We as instructors can, and I made this mistake once. I used it because I was like in a crunch and I realized that didn't have the right material. I said, okay, create this. And then I started going through the class and realized, oh my God, I did not look at this properly. This is bunk. Like,
The
what am I
trust,
doing here?
blind trust, it happens. We've all done it and students do it. Oh yeah.
Exactly. So I've done it myself. I think we all understand. So you had said that you've been doing some really fun things with incorporating AI with the Praxair simulations. So
Yes.
now I don't want this to just talk about our simulations. You have been using it and you've done some fun things. Maybe just share
Yeah.
some of what you've been doing.
Well, so I use Praxar simulations for a lot of my classes. This example, I didn't use Praxar for this, but it was perfect. It would be perfectly in
Yeah.
line. So what I did for my data analytics course is I built a simulation, meaning I thought through the ideas, the concepts of what I wanted. And the beauty of what AI did was it allowed me to create team profiles that allow the students to view the data in a specific way. So the data, everyone gets the same initial data, but the way they view the data informs the insights they make, the framework, the understanding, so that they get the same data, but they'll do different decisions with it. And with what I'll do with AI is basically they have an output they give me for their decisions as a business based off their framework. And then I basically create internal reports and responses that a company could have that would be done internally anyways that are reflective of that. So now it reiterates, okay, you deviated from your whole company core purpose, but the research is saying this, and now you have to reinforce your decision based off whatever frameworks you've been taught. And I could do that before, but I can do it so much expeditiously, like so much faster. And now they're getting stuff that is really dialed into their decisions
Yeah.
that either support or refute their decisions. And it would be so hard to do that before. I could do it, but it'd be so hard. And I can do it so much better now, where each simulation for each team is aligned perfectly to their learning, where then they're like, oh, we're actually going down a bad path. And we should have used this framework. We're missing this. And we haven't ethically, the data is not aligned this and that. And oh, we didn't ask these questions. And it allows the training to be simulated, but way more applicable and diverse to their learning. Like UDL is like universal design for learning.
Yes.
Like, my goodness, you can do so many things with AI, but it's driven by me knowing what I want to teach the students.
Yes.
Meaning if I didn't have an expertise to know, hey, how this all fits and what I want to challenge them with, I couldn't think of making that. And as teachers, we have that expertise. It's just removing yourself from your rote process and saying, well, what do I want them to actually do? And AI, you say, hey, I want to create this. How do I re-envision this? Can I create something that does this? And AI will help you think through it and then create that.
Man, we could have a whole other and we might have a whole other conversation about AI and UDL because that it has the potential to solve a lot of the challenges for us as instructors when you're talking about how do we teach those students the margins and make sure that we're catching everyone. What's interesting just about what you said about with the data and the different information. Now I approach things differently. You do coding, but I come back. I'm a creative writer originally by training and trade.
Okay.
And so I always look at it like, man, this is where I could use talking about what you're saying, different visualizations. But I'm like, man, you could really do some fun things. I just suddenly thought this is like, okay, so here you got a different round, and you look at each round of a simulation typically has,
Yes.
some things are happening. Well, why not just plug that into AI and say, okay, generate a memo.
I'm doing that. I'm doing it. Totally that. So with that simulation, round 2, I give them unethical data with a memo that they have to pick and choose if they use it or not. I don't tell them to use it. So if they do, the teams that use it in the fun aspect get penalized. And then there's a report in the industry saying unethical data used by these teams. And it sort of like shouts them out. And it's you could do anything.
I know, it's so cool. There is so
You're
much.
thinking the right way, Trevor. It's so good.
I love it. Oh man, see here I thought I invented something new, but of course it's not the case. Okay, we could talk.
Nothing is new, technically.
I know. We could talk for this forever, but I do I want to wrap it up because we're gonna have some other discussions. So if you had to say to everyone, here's the one takeaway, here's the one thing that you would pass on to an instructor out there thinking about how, if I want to start dabbling with AI to augment my experiential learning, what would be the one thing you'd say, this is what you need to do?
Know why. That is, and that's such a, not a blanket and a basic, but just know why. Meaning, I got into using AI because I just love to learn and play. And then I realized I can literally do anything. And I was like, well, to what point though? And I look at my classes and I say, well, why would I make this assignment this way? Why would I? And it's like, well, the purpose is not to make me look better. It's to better support my students. And it is literally just a tool. And I use it just like a tool where it doesn't replace every process. I enhance what I'm looking for in different areas. So I've used it for some things continuously and other things once or twice. Just if you're going to use AI, be present in, okay, why am I using it? What am I trying to do? When I do any workshops with universities, colleges, MBA programs, businesses, I always say, why do you want to use it though? And if they don't know, I just like, don't use it because you're not ready yet. But if you know why, I want to create this, that's a great starting point to learn the process. The process is not more important than the purpose. And you got to know what the purpose is first. Why are you trying to do this? And then figure out what you're going to do.
And there's a couple frameworks that you have taught and talked about. Maybe just briefly touch on those, and then we can put them up on the
Absolutely. So there are 2 frameworks. One is a mindset. So it's the 4W ethical framework. I published it this year, going through it, and it's the idea that what are you gaining, what are you losing, what are you not practicing, and what are you accessing? And it's just to be present in your decisions. What are you gaining and losing is really quick level, like what am I getting from using this tool, and what am I not getting, like dependency on this tool. The other boxes are, what are you not practicing is a really important place I sit, meaning if I'm writing something, it's like, should I be practicing this writing, or am I offloading that thinking that's okay? Like, am I not practicing a skill set that I should be practicing, that I'm required to practice, or is it something that I'm okay with? And then what are you accessing is the exciting and the scary part, meaning AI enables us to access a skill that we otherwise haven't gained. Great example, long story short, my first experience with AI was 3.5 years ago, and I coded like 3 months of code in 3 days. I know how to code and develop, but I accessed a skill of development that I didn't have and I did not gain, but I was able to just develop it so much quicker. I'm aware of that, meaning if I got hired a job to do at that speed, I would be lying. And that's the concern of access, is being present in what's happening. And the other framework is sort of like a literal use of AI called the Spark framework. And it's about understanding simplicity, precision, adaptability, reinforcement, and knowledge. And it's an acronym that I created saying, well, let's be specific in how do we interact with AI and sort of directing it through a prompt. Simplicity and precision are all about the instruction you give the AI. And people thought prompting would go away because autonomous AI would be important. Even if AI is fully autonomous, it doesn't know what you're thinking. And even if you have a mental chip and AI can read your minds, your thoughts are the prompt. Like, prompting is, in my argument, still critically important. So simplicity and precision, being simple in your directions, but very precise with what you want. Doesn't mean not a lot, but being very specific in what you're doing. And then the adaptability is being able to adapt to what AI gives you. The reinforcement is reinforcing it. Hey, I like this. Excellent job. Well done. So that there's no break in context and understanding it. It fills in the gaps. If I'm giving you directions for something and there's a lot of assumptions, you have to fill in the gaps with those assumptions. AI does it automatically. And if you're building something, you want to give more detail so you're clear and there are less assumptions being made. So there's less mistakes being made. And then the idea of hallucinations and mistakes, the last part is knowledge, just saying, hey, let's just take that and rebuild back into how do I then reapply this into my communications and my process and what I'm doing. So the SPARK framework, simplicity, precision, adaptability, reinforcement, and knowledge.
And since you taught that to us here, I've definitely used it. And I think what that really has hit home for me is it's truly an iterative tool and very much back and forth. It's and now I kind of understand why it's built like a conversation, because if you and I, just like this conversation, it's not structured as where it is. It's going to talk. I'm going to build off what you say and you build what I say. There's no like, I don't just ask you a question and the definitive answer is done and then we move on. It's the same thing with AI. When people sit there and go into it and they type something in, they don't get what they look for and they just go, oh, this tool is garbage. I think that's where there's a missed opportunity. And I really appreciate you coming in today and kind of sketching out a little bit, opening kind of that little window into the world of how we can use AI more effectively, because, well, obviously I believe in experiential learning. I believe that it is learning by doing is the best way, but there are tools available. And we need to not only just have our students use them, but we need to use them responsibly ourselves. It can save us time, it can save us effort, but it also can help us teach them how to use these tools responsibly. So that is our episode for today. So first of all, thank you very much for joining and sharing your expertise. I want to thank everyone else for listening to the Experiential Edge. And remember, this is your go-to podcast on actionable ideas on how to do things basically the right way in the classroom, learning by doing. Stay on the edge, people.
You've been listening to the Experiential Edge. For more tips, tricks, and ideas from this episode, go to experientialedgepod.com.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.